The last day of Pompeii, when Vesuvius awoke. Dawn breaks over the Bay of Naples on August 24th, 79 CE. The sun climbs above the horizon, painting the water gold and illuminating the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, a mountain that has stood silent for generations. In the seaside city of Pompeii, no one could imagine that by tomorrow, their entire world would vanish beneath a shroud of volcanic ash. This isn't just a story about a natural disaster. This is about the last hours of a vibrant Roman city, its people caught in the midst of ordinary lives before nature unleashed extraordinary destruction. What makes Pompeii's story unique is not just how its people died, but how they lived, and how a catastrophe preserved that moment like an insect in amber, waiting for the world to discover it again. Picture Pompeii on that final morning. The streets are already bustling. Merchants roll up metal shutters on their shops. The public baths are heating up for the day's patrons. In a wealthy home, slaves prepare breakfast while children reluctantly begin their lessons. A baker pulls fresh loaves from his oven, stamping them with his personal mark. Two politicians have plastered fresh campaign messages on walls overnight, each promising better governance than his rival. It's just another day in a prosperous resort town of 20,000 people, nestled between the sea and the fertile volcanic soil that makes the region's wines famous throughout the empire. No one pays much attention to the mountain looming 7 kilometers away. It's been part of the landscape for as long as anyone can remember, but beneath the surface, something has been building. For days, wells in the city have been running dry as groundwater shifts. Small earthquakes have rattled dishes from shelves, concerning but not alarming for a region accustomed to such tremors. 17 years earlier, in 62 CE, a major earthquake damaged much of the city. The Romans, being practical, simply rebuilt. Some construction is still ongoing. Animals have been acting strangely. Dogs barking at nothing, birds abandoning their nests. These signs might have warned someone versed in natural philosophy, but to ordinary citizens they're merely curiosities, not omens of impending doom. Around midday, everything changes. A massive explosion tears through the top of Mount Vesuvius, sending a column of ash, pumice, and gas 15 kilometers into the sky. The sound is deafening even in Pompeii, but in nearby Herculaneum, closer to the mountain's base, it's apocalyptic. The column rises higher, spreading outward at its top, like the pine trees that dot the Italian landscape. A similarity that Pliny the Younger will note in his famous account, written years later from his vantage point across the bay at Misenum. Imagine standing in Pompeii's form as this unfolds. The ground trembles. The brilliant Mediterranean sun darkens as though eclipsed. An unnatural cloud towers above the mountain. For a brief moment, confusion rather than panic reigns. Some point and stare. Others seek shelter. Many Romans educated in natural philosophy believe volcanic events are caused by winds trapped underground, seeking escape, a frightening but natural process, not divine punishment. Then the first fragments of pumice begin to rain down. Light at first, small white and gray pieces no larger than coins patter on rooftops and bounce in the streets. Some curious residents catch them in their hands, examining these strange stones that fall from the sky like hail, yet remain warm to the touch. The air fills with a sulphurous smell. In a large house on the Street of Abundance, a wealthy merchant gathers his family. Should they flee or shelter in place? The streets are increasingly covered with pumice, making walking difficult. The falling debris poses dangers, yet staying means risking roof collapse under the accumulating weight. different families make different choices, decisions that will determine whether they live or die. Across the bay at Misenum, Pliny the Elder, famous natural philosopher and commander of the Roman fleet, observes the eruption with scientific curiosity. Despite warnings, he orders a ship prepared. Part scientific expedition, part rescue mission, he sets sail directly toward the danger, a decision that will cost him his life, but provide us with eyewitness accounts through his nephew, Pliny the Younger. As afternoon turns to evening in Pompeii, day has become night. Artificial darkness engulfs the city, broken only by scattered torches and the eerie red glow reflecting off the cloud above Vesuvius. The fall of pumice intensifies, now mixed with larger rocks that crash through roofs and crush the unwary. The layer on the ground reaches ankle depth, then knee height. Streets become unrecognizable. Landmarks disappear. Inside the temple of Isis, priests gather in increasingly desperate prayer. The Egyptian goddess was believed to control the elements, but even divine intervention seems powerless against Vesuvius's fury. Meanwhile, in the gladiatorial barracks, men trained to face death with courage find themselves trapped, their fighting skills useless against the mountain's onslaught. The first casualties occur, the elderly and infirm unable to withstand the thickening toxic air, though struck by falling debris or crushed when buildings collapse under the weight accumulating on roofs. Some Pompeians who initially decided to stay now change their minds, wrapping pillows around their heads as makeshift helmets before venturing into the lethal storm. One family of 4, father, mother, and 2 small children, huddled together in their home's central garden, covering themselves with mattresses for protection. We know their fate because their remains were found in exactly this position, preserved as cavities in the ash that would later be filled with plaster by archaeologists, capturing their final moments in heartbreaking detail. By midnight, approximately 12 hours into the eruption, Pompeii lies under 2 meters of pumice. Many who haven't fled are trapped inside collapsed buildings. Others shelter wherever they can, hoping the onslaught will soon end. Some pray, some drink wine to calm their fears. A few methodically bury their valuables, planning to retrieve them once the crisis passes. In one remarkable home, a dog remains chained to a post, unable to escape. Its contorted form, also preserved as a plaster cast, testifies to the panic of animals who sensed the danger but could not flee. Nearby, 54 people seek refuge in the large vaulted cellars of a suburban villa, bringing food and water supplies, a seemingly rational choice that will prove fatal by morning. Then comes the most deadly phase of all. Shortly after midnight, the towering eruption column that has been growing for hours begins to collapse under its own weight. This sends superheated avalanches of gas, ash, and rock, pyroclastic flows, racing down the mountainside at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour. The temperature within these flows reaches 500 degrees Celsius, hot enough to instantly carbonize wood, cloth, and flesh. The first surge hits Herculaneum, the town closest to Vesuvius. Death comes in seconds, so quickly that victims have no time to react. We know this because excavations revealed skeletons frozen in ordinary poses, not defensive positions. The intense heat boils brain tissue inside skulls and vaporizes flesh, leaving behind only bones that would be buried under 20 meters of volcanic material. As dawn approaches on August 25th, Pompeii's time runs out. After hours of sustained eruption, multiple pyroclastic surges reach the city in quick succession. Unlike the slower accumulation of pumice that allowed some to escape, These lethal waves leave no possibility for survival. Inside the Nocera Gate at the southeastern edge of the city, a poignant scene unfolds. A man identified by a signet ring as a wealthy merchant named Lucius Eumachius Fuscus carries a small bag containing 360 coins and a house key, his entire liquid fortune. Beside him, a woman clutches a purse of jewels and cradles a small child wrapped in cloth. They are frozen in their final attempt to escape. At the harbor, a mass of humanity has gathered hoping for sea rescue. The disaster actually extends the coastline, stranding these desperate people farther from the water. Their remains would be discovered 1,800 years later, hundreds of skeletons together, testimony to Pompeii's failed evacuation. The pyroclastic surges that hit Pompeii are slightly cooler than those that struck Herculaneum, around 300 degrees Celsius, rather than 500. This difference created two distinct patterns of death. In Herculaneum, victims were instantly reduced to skeletons. In Pompeii, the superheated gas caused muscles to contract violently before death, leaving bodies in boxer-like defensive postures, hands raised, legs pulled up, their final reflexive attempt to protect themselves from the unsurvivable. By mid-morning of August 25th, it's over. Where Pompeii and Herculaneum once stood, only ash remains visible. The eruption has transformed the entire landscape. The coastline has extended. The very mountain has changed shape, with Vesuvius losing much of its height. An estimated 16,000 people have perished. Some bodies will never be recovered, buried too deeply under the volcanic debris. But something extraordinary has happened in the midst of this tragedy. The very agent of destruction, volcanic ash, has created a perfectly sealed time capsule. Bodies decompose, leaving hollow spaces in the compacted ash. Buildings, artifacts, and even organic materials like bread and fruit are preserved beneath the airtight seal. Pompeii has vanished from the living world, but it has not been destroyed, merely hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. That rediscovery would not begin until 1748, nearly 17 centuries later, when Spanish engineer Roque Joaquin de Alcubierre, searching for art treasures, began systematic excavations. The intact city that emerged from the ash astonished the world. Unlike ruins that deteriorated slowly through exposure and looting, Pompeii was preserved in its entirety at a single moment in time. The excavations revealed unprecedented insights into ordinary Roman life, wall paintings with pigments still vibrant, election notices and graffiti documenting politics, romance, and crude jokes, fast food counters with food residue still in serving pots. The mundane details of daily life that normally vanish from historical record were captured here in extraordinary detail. Most haunting of all were the body casts, hollow spaces left by decomposed human remains that, when filled with plaster, revealed Pompeii's citizens in their final moments. A man reaching out to shield his face, a dog writhing at the end of its chain, a mother cradling her child. These weren't just historical evidence. They were human beings caught in the midst of an unimaginable catastrophe, their terror preserved across millennia. The discovery transformed our understanding of the ancient world and created a new science of archaeology. Before Pompeii, study of the past relied heavily on texts, monuments, and artifacts removed from their original context. After Pompeii, archaeologists understood the value of preserving sites intact, of studying everyday objects in their original positions, of seeing ancient cities as complete ecosystems rather than collections of treasures. Ironically, The same volcanic processes that destroyed Pompeii also ensured its immortality. Had the city simply declined like so many others, it would have been dismantled for building materials, its artifacts scattered, its structure slowly eroded by time. Instead, it remains the most complete Roman city ever discovered, a window into a world that would otherwise be known only through fragments. Today, Vesuvius still looms over the Bay of Naples. It remains active, closely monitored by the most sophisticated volcanic observation system in the world. More than 3 million people live in its potential eruption zone, a population density that makes it arguably the most dangerous volcano on Earth. The mountain's next awakening won't catch humanity by surprise as it did in 79 CE. We understand now what the Pompeians couldn't: the warning signs, the mechanisms of eruption, the deadly power of pyroclastic flows. Yet despite all our technological advancement, a similar eruption today would still cause catastrophic damage. Vesuvius reminds us of a humbling truth. For all our accomplishments, we remain at the mercy of geological forces operating on timescales that make human civilization seem momentary. The same volcanic processes that have shaped our planet since its formation continue today, indifferent to the cities we build and the lives we lead. What makes Pompeii's story so compelling is not just the spectacular nature of its destruction, but the ordinary humanity revealed in that fatal moment. The baker who left loaves in his oven, the lovers embracing as death enveloped them, the wealthy merchant who grabbed his life savings but couldn't outrun the pyroclastic surge. Their final choices, some rational, some emotional, some instinctive, mirror how we might react faced with sudden catastrophe. In those last hours, as Vesuvius transformed from backdrop to executioner, Pompeii's citizens experienced the ultimate human vulnerability. Yet in their destruction, they achieved a kind of immortality. Their city, their possessions, their bodies became the most vivid window into ancient daily life ever discovered. Through them, we don't just learn about history, we connect with it personally, recognizing our common humanity across the centuries. The last day of Pompeii ended in darkness and ash, but from that darkness emerged one of history's most illuminating discoveries, a stark reminder that civilizations, like individuals, exist in a world where nature ultimately sets the terms, and where ordinary moments can freeze into eternity when the mountain decides to wake. Mansa Musa, the richest man who ever lived. Imagine wealth so vast that simply traveling through a region crashes its economy. Picture a caravan stretching farther than the eye can see. Thousands of people, hundreds of camels, each animal bearing gold dust and gold bars in quantities that modern economists estimate would be worth over $400 billion today. At the center of this staggering procession is a single man, Mansa Musa, Emperor of Mali, making his Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 and CE. His generosity along the route proved almost catastrophic. In Cairo, Alexandria, and other cities, he gave away so much gold to the poor, to religious institutions, and to officials that he single-handedly caused rampant inflation. The sudden flood of gold devalued the metal for over a decade, destabilizing economies across North Africa and the Middle East. It was perhaps history's most dramatic case of accidental economic warfare through excessive charity. Yet this pilgrimage was just one episode in the life of a ruler so wealthy that contemporary Arab historians struggled to describe his riches, and European mapmakers placed his image on their charts. Seated on a throne of gold, holding a golden scepter and a golden nugget. Even today, economic historians rank Mansa Musa as likely the wealthiest individual to have ever lived, far surpassing modern billionaires. But who was this monarch whose treasure dwarfed that of any European king? How did an empire in the African interior generate such inconceivable wealth? And why has his story been so often overlooked in Western histories of the medieval world? The Mali Empire that Mansa Musa inherited in the early 14th century was already a sophisticated political entity, with a century of expansion behind it. Founded around 1235 by the legendary warrior king Sundiata Keita, Mali had grown to control trade routes across the western Sahel region of Africa, connecting the gold mines of sub-Saharan West Africa with North African and Middle Eastern markets. Musa came to power around 1312 CE, reportedly after his predecessor, Mansa Abu Bakr II, disappeared on an expedition to explore the Atlantic Ocean. According to 14th century scholar Ibn Khaldun, Abu Bakr had become obsessed with discovering what lay beyond the ocean's limits, outfitting a fleet of hundreds of ships that never returned. This startling historical possibility, that an African ruler mounted a major Atlantic expedition nearly 2 centuries before Columbus, remains controversial but hints at Mali's ambition and resources. Upon becoming Mansa emperor, Musa inherited control of an empire spanning numerous modern-day nations, including Mali, Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea, Niger, Nigeria, Chad, and Mauritania. At its peak under his rule, Mali covered over 400,000 square miles, larger than modern Texas and California combined. But geographic reach alone doesn't explain Mali's extraordinary wealth. The empire's prosperity stemmed from its strategic position, controlling access to 2 of medieval Africa's most valuable commodities, gold and salt. Mali encompassed the gold-producing regions of Bambouk, Bure, and most importantly, Wangara, in present-day Ghana. These areas produced approximately 2/3 of the world's gold supply during the Middle Ages. While European kingdoms struggled with gold scarcity, Mali had so much that, according to some accounts, only the emperor could possess gold nuggets. Everyone else was restricted to gold dust. Equally important was Mali's control of the salt mines of Tagaza in the Sahara. In a world without refrigeration, salt was essential for food preservation, and the inland regions of West Africa suffered from salt scarcity. This created a perfect economic symmetry. Gold-rich southern regions desperately needed salt from the north, while salt-producing regions needed gold. Mali's position in the middle allowed it to tax and control this enormously profitable trade. Mansa Musa recognized that Islam could further strengthen his empire. While Mali had previous Muslim rulers, Musa's devout practice and promotion of Islam connected Mali more firmly to the international Islamic world. He established diplomatic relations with other Muslim kingdoms in Morocco, Egypt, and the Middle East, creating trade partnerships and political alliances that further enriched his domains. It was his religious devotion that prompted his famous Hajj to Mecca in 1324. While all able Muslims are expected to make this pilgrimage once in their lifetime, few have done so with the style of Mansa Musa. According to contemporary Arab historian al-Umari, who interviewed witnesses, Musa's procession included 60,000 people, including 12,000 slaves who each carried a 4-pound gold staff. 500 servants preceded him, each carrying a golden staff. He brought 80 to 100 camels carrying 300 pounds of gold each. The emperor himself rode on horseback, dressed in the finest silks, surrounded by his senior wives, generals, and advisors. This was not merely extravagance, it was calculated political theater. Musa was announcing Mali's arrival on the world stage, demonstrating that his backward African empire could outshine any kingdom in wealth and sophistication. The psychological impact was enormous. As chronicler al-Umari later wrote, "This man flooded Cairo with his benefactions. He left no court emir nor holder of a royal office without the gift of a load of gold." In Cairo, Musa met with the Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad, theoretically his religious superior as the ruler of Egypt, but clearly his economic inferior based on the wealth displayed. When the Sultan offered Musa customary hospitality, the African emperor outdid him by bestowing lavish gifts that, according to some accounts, included a palace built overnight for a brief stay. By the time Musa reached Mecca, his fame preceded him. His generosity to the holy cities was unprecedented. In Medina and Mecca, he purchased properties and established endowments to provide for Mali pilgrims in perpetuity. These humanitarian efforts ensured that even less wealthy citizens of his empire could fulfill their religious obligations. But his legendary Hajj also created problems. Musa had given away so much gold in Cairo that its value plummeted by approximately 25%, devastating the local economy. Before departing Egypt for his return journey, he was forced to borrow gold at high interest rates just to maintain his expenses. Some historians suggest this indicates economic naivete, but others see it as evidence of strategic calculation, deliberately creating financial dependency to leverage commercial relationships. The return journey to Mali proved equally momentous for his empire's development. In Cairo, Musa encountered the Andalusian poet and architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, whom he convinced to return to Mali. In Timbuktu and other cities, al-Sahili introduced advanced Islamic architectural techniques, constructing magnificent mosques and palaces that transformed Mali's urban landscape. More significantly, Musa brought back numerous Islamic scholars, jurists, and educated men from across the Muslim world. This intellectual influx established Timbuktu as Africa's leading center of Islamic learning. The university at Sankore Mosque became one of the world's most prestigious educational institutions, attracting students from across Africa and the Middle East to study astronomy, mathematics, literature, and law. At its peak during and after Musa's reign, Timbuktu's libraries contained an estimated 700,000 manuscripts, a collection rivaling or surpassing many European centers of learning. The city contained at least 180 Quranic schools and multiple universities. A contemporary saying held that salt comes from the north, gold from the south, and silver from the country of the white men, but the word of God and the treasures of wisdom come from Timbuktu. Musa's vision extended beyond religious and educational investments. He revolutionized Mali's urban development, building mosques, madrasas, and palaces throughout his domain. Friday mosques, central worship spaces for weekly community prayer, were constructed in every significant town. Enormous structures like the Great Mosque of Djenné, though rebuilt in later centuries, trace their original foundations to his building program. The emperor also formalized Mali's administrative systems. The empire was divided into provinces governed by appointed officials called farbas. These governors collected taxes, maintained order, and represented imperial authority. Below them, clan chiefs and village headmen managed local affairs. A complex bureaucracy of treasury officials, military commanders, and court functionaries kept the empire functioning smoothly. Justice was administered through a dual system. Islamic Sharia law operated alongside traditional Mandinka customary law. Musa, like many African rulers, adapting Islam to local contexts, balanced religious innovation with cultural continuity, creating a distinctively West African form of Islamic governance. Security and stable trade routes were paramount to Mali's prosperity. Musa maintained a professional standing army, reportedly numbering 100,000 men, with a corps of 10,000 cavalry. This force ensured merchant caravans could travel safely throughout the empire's vast territories. Contemporary accounts describe the extraordinary security of Mali's trade routes, with merchants able to travel for weeks without fear of banditry. After returning from his Hajj, Musa continued to rule for approximately a decade, dying around 1337. During this period, he consolidated Mali's position as the dominant power in West Africa. His fame had spread so far that in 1339, 2 years after his death, when news traveled slowly, Mali appeared on the Catalan Atlas, a major European map, with Mansa Musa depicted seated on a throne holding a gold nugget, with the inscription, "This Negro lord is called Musa Mali, Lord of the Negroes of Guinea. So abundant is the gold found in his country that he is the richest and most noble king in all the land." Musa's legacy extended far beyond his lifetime. The Mali Empire continued to prosper under his son, Mansa Magan, and later rulers, remaining a major power until the late 15th century. Timbuktu's reputation as a center of learning endured for centuries. Mali's governance systems influenced successor states throughout the region. And perhaps most significantly, Mali demonstrated an alternative model of African state building that belied European colonial narratives about primitive African societies. Yet despite his extraordinary wealth and achievements, Mansa Musa remains relatively unknown in Western historical education. This historical erasure stems from several factors. European powers that later colonized Africa had ideological reasons to minimize pre-colonial African achievements. The destruction of many Timbuktu manuscripts by Moroccan invaders in 1591 and later European colonizers eliminated primary sources. And persistent biases in how world history is taught often marginalize African civilizations. The recovery of Mansa Musa's historical significance reflects broader efforts to develop more balanced global histories. Archaeological excavations in Mali have revealed the sophisticated urban planning of medieval West African cities. Projects to preserve and digitize surviving Timbuktu manuscripts have provided new insights into Mali's intellectual traditions. Economic historians have calculated Mali's gold production and trade volumes, confirming contemporary accounts of its vast wealth. What makes Mansa Musa's story particularly relevant today is how it challenges persistent misconceptions about historical Africa. His reign demonstrates that sub-Saharan Africa wasn't isolated from global networks, but was integral to them. The Mali Empire wasn't primitive, but maintained complex administrative systems, diplomatic relations, and educational institutions. And perhaps most importantly, Mali's wealth wasn't extracted and exploited by external powers, but was strategically leveraged by African leadership for African development. The economic foundations of Musa's wealth also raise provocative questions about how we measure value across history. Unlike many European monarchs who inherited dynastic wealth or built it through conquest alone, Musa's fortune derived from controlling natural resources and trade networks. He didn't simply possess gold. He understood its international value and how to use it strategically. While European kings debased their currencies and bankrupted their treasuries for war, Musa invested in education, architecture, and religious institutions. This isn't to romanticize Mali. Like all empires, it was built partly through military conquest and maintained control through force when necessary. Slavery existed within its economic system, though with important differences from later European plantation slavery. But understanding Mali's achievements allows us to develop a more accurate picture of global medieval history, one where Africa isn't peripheral, but central to international networks of trade, knowledge, and power. The ultimate measure of Mansa Musa's wealth lies not just in the gold he possessed, but in what he built with it, an empire whose cultural and intellectual legacy far outlasted its political dominance. When Timbuktu finally fell to Moroccan invaders in 1591, its libraries contained mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, poetry, legal commentaries, and historical chronicles that represented one of the world's great concentrations of human knowledge. Today, when contemporary billionaires seek to secure their legacy through philanthropy and institution building, they are following a path that Mansa Musa walked 7 centuries earlier, understanding that true wealth is measured not just in resources controlled, but in what those resources build for future generations. The man who crashed economies with his generosity, who transformed a trading empire into a center of global learning, who balanced religious innovation with cultural tradition, deserves recognition not just as history's wealthiest individual, but as one of its most consequential rulers. A king of kings, whose golden legacy continues to be unearthed by those willing to look beyond conventional narratives of world history. The building of the Great Pyramid, Khufu's eternal legacy. The morning sun crests the eastern horizon, casting long shadows across the Giza Plateau. In the soft dawn light, thousands of men stir from their sleep in a purpose-built village nearby. They eat a simple breakfast of bread, beer, and onions before gathering their tools: copper chisels, wooden mallets, ropes of twisted papyrus. As they have for decades, they make their way to the massive construction site dominating the landscape. There, rising from the desert sand, stands the most ambitious building project the world has ever known, the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Even unfinished, it commands awe. Layer upon layer of massive limestone blocks climb toward the sky, already reaching higher than any structure built before. When completed, it will stand 481 feet tall, remain the world's tallest human-made structure for over 3,800 years, and endure as the sole survivor of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This is not just the story of an architectural marvel. This is an exploration of how one civilization's vision, organization, and ingenuity created a monument so perfect and enduring that even today, with all our technological advancement, we struggle to fully explain how they accomplished it. To understand the Great Pyramid, we must first understand the Egypt of Khufu, 4th dynasty pharaoh, who ruled around 2560 BCE. Egypt stood at the height of its Old Kingdom power, politically unified, economically prosperous, and culturally confident. The annual flooding of the Nile created the most productive agricultural system in the ancient world, generating the surplus wealth and available seasonal labor that made monumental architecture possible. Khufu inherited the concept of pyramid building from his father Sneferu, who had revolutionized royal tomb design. After experimenting with the step pyramid form pioneered by Djoser a century earlier, Sneferu created the first true smooth-sided pyramid at Dashur. His red pyramid represented the perfection of the form, but his son would take this achievement to heights previously unimaginable. When Khufu ascended the throne, he selected a site on the Giza Plateau for his eternal monument. This was not an arbitrary choice. The location offered a stable limestone bedrock foundation capable of supporting enormous weight. It stood on the west bank of the Nile, the traditional side for tombs where the sun set into the underworld, and it occupied a prominent position visible for miles across the Nile Valley, announcing the pharaoh's power to all who beheld it. Before a single stone could be laid, an enormous planning effort was required. The precision of the Great Pyramid still astounds modern engineers. Its base forms an almost perfect square, with sides that differ by less than 8 inches, over lengths of more than 750 feet. The pyramid is aligned to true north, with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a degree. These measurements were achieved without modern surveying equipment, using instead weighted lines, wooden squares, and astronomical observations. The design itself embodies sophisticated mathematical knowledge. The pyramid's height-to-base ratio approximates pi/2. The angles and proportions suggest an understanding of the golden ratio centuries before Greek mathematicians would formalize the concept. Some scholars believe the dimensions encode astronomical information about solar and lunar cycles, though such theories remain controversial. Having established the design, Khufu's engineers faced the monumental challenge of materials procurement. The Great Pyramid contains an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, weighing on average 2.5 tons each. The heaviest blocks, used in the king's chamber, weigh up to 80 tons. The logistics of quarrying, transporting, and placing this much stone staggers the imagination. The majority of the pyramid consists of local limestone, quarried from the Giza Plateau itself, creating the vast quarries still visible around the monument. But the smooth outer casing stones came from quarries at Tura, across the Nile. Most challenging of all, the granite used for the king's chamber, and relieving chambers above it had to be transported from Aswan, over 500 miles upriver. Moving these materials required a sophisticated transportation infrastructure. The limestone likely traveled on wooden sleds, dragged over ground made slippery with water, a technique depicted in tomb paintings. The massive granite blocks came down river on barges during the annual Nile flood, when water levels were high enough to navigate closer to the construction site. A purpose-built harbor received these deliveries, with evidence of an elaborate canal system bringing materials from the river to the plateau. But the question that has puzzled observers for millennia remains. How did the Egyptians raise these massive stones to such heights without modern machinery? The most plausible explanation involves ramps, though scholars debate their exact configuration. A straight external ramp would have become impossibly long and massive as the pyramid rose higher. More likely, the builders used some combination of techniques, perhaps a shorter, straight ramp for the lower portions, spiraling ramps hugging the pyramid's face for middle sections, and internal ramps within the pyramid structure itself for the highest levels. Recent evidence supporting the internal ramp theory comes from thermal imaging and muon radiography that revealed previously unknown voids within the structure. French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin's internal ramp hypothesis suggests the Egyptians left a notch in each corner of the pyramid as they built, creating space for workers to maneuver blocks around the corners of an internal spiraling ramp. Whatever method they used, moving each multi-ton block required extraordinary coordination. Teams of workers used ropes and levers to position stones with millimeter precision. The outer casing stones were polished so perfectly that the joints between them measured less than 1/50th of an inch, creating a seamless surface that would have gleamed blindingly white in the desert sun, visible for miles. Who were these workers that achieved such precision? Popular culture long depicted the pyramids as built by slaves driven by the whip. But archaeological evidence tells a different story. Excavations at the workers' village at Giza revealed well-organized living quarters with evidence of skilled medical care, including healed broken bones and even primitive brain surgeries. Workers received payment in rations and were buried in honorable tombs near the pyramid, treatment no slave would have received. Most of the construction force likely consisted of peasant farmers who worked on the pyramid during the annual Nile flood, when their fields were underwater and agricultural work impossible. For 3 or 4 months each year, perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 workers gathered at Giza, providing service to their divine king while receiving guaranteed food during what would otherwise be a lean season. This system of seasonal corvée labor, rather than slavery, powered Egypt's monumental architecture. A smaller corps of perhaps 4,000 permanent skilled craftsmen, stonemasons, engineers, architects, worked year-round. These specialists enjoyed high status, with some even receiving the honor of small tombs near their pharaoh. The Greeks would later name one such architect, Hemiunu, though Egyptian sources remain largely silent on who designed the structure. The internal organization of this workforce displayed remarkable sophistication. Workers were divided into crews, gangs, and files, divisions, with distinctive names like the Enduring Ones or Friends of Khufu. Graffiti inside the Great Pyramid reveals these teams competed with each other, recording their achievements in red ochre markings hidden within the structure, perhaps the world's oldest workplace motivational system. The entire enterprise required not just brute labor but precise logistical support. Feeding tens of thousands of workers demanded an agricultural surplus, possible only in the fertile Nile Valley. Bakeries at Giza produced bread on an industrial scale. Cattle, sheep, and goats provided protein. Beer, safer than water and nutritionally substantial, flowed in quantities that would impress a modern brewery. Support workers, including bakers, brewers, clothes makers, tool repairers, and physicians, created a virtual city around the construction site. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of this infrastructure. Production facilities capable of feeding a small city, dormitories for rotating shifts of workers, and administrative buildings where scribes would have tracked resources and assignments. What motivated this enormous expenditure of resources and human energy? For the ancient Egyptians, the pyramid was not merely a tomb, but a cosmic machine, a device to transform a human ruler into an eternal god. The structure itself represented the primordial mound from which creation first emerged, the stairway on which the pharaoh would ascend to join the circumpolar stars that never set beneath the horizon, becoming an eternal, undying presence in the heavens. This religious significance explains the extraordinary precision in the pyramid's construction. Every measurement, every alignment, had theological importance. The narrow shafts extending from the king's chamber pointed to specific stars associated with the afterlife journey. The subterranean chamber represented the underworld. The grand gallery and king's chamber marked the path of transfiguration. At the heart of this massive structure lies a relatively modest burial chamber, the king's chamber, measuring just 10 by 20 feet. Here stood Khufu's granite sarcophagus, though his body and treasures were looted in antiquity. Above this chamber, 5 separate relieving chambers distribute the enormous weight pressing down from above, preventing the ceiling from collapsing, an engineering solution that has maintained structural integrity for over 4,500 years. The pyramid took approximately 20 years to complete, almost the entirety of Khufu's 23-year reign. As it neared completion, specialized teams added the final touches. The smooth white Tura limestone casing stones were placed from top to bottom, working downward to avoid damaging finish sections. At the very summit, a gold-plated pyramidion capstone would have caught the first and last rays of the sun, symbolizing the Benben stone of Egyptian creation mythology. When finished, the Great Pyramid formed the centerpiece of a complex including subsidiary pyramids for queens, a mortuary temple where priests would make offerings to the deceased king, a valley temple near the Nile, and a causeway connecting these elements. Perhaps most iconic is the Great Sphinx, though evidence suggests this was actually commissioned by Khufu's son Khafra, who built the second pyramid at Giza. What happened after completion reveals an irony of history. Despite creating the most enduring monument ever built, Khufu himself remains enigmatic. Only one small ivory figurine definitively depicting him has survived. Later Egyptians remembered him as a harsh, even cruel ruler, though these accounts come from much later periods and likely reflect the enormous demands the pyramid placed on Egyptian society, rather than historical fact. More telling is what happened after Khufu's death. His son Djedefre abandoned Giza, building his pyramid elsewhere. When Khafre returned to Giza, his pyramid, though seemingly taller because it stands on higher ground, is actually smaller than his father's. By the 5th dynasty, just decades later, Egyptian kings were building much smaller pyramids with less sophisticated construction. Never again would Egypt attempt anything approaching the scale and precision of the Great Pyramid. This suggests the possibility that the Great Pyramid represented not just Khufu's ambition, but a breaking point. A project so massive, it strained even Egypt's extraordinary resources to their limit. The perfect preservation of the internal chambers, contrasted with later pyramids, suggests knowledge lost, rather than deliberately abandoned, as if the greatest experts took some secrets to their graves. Over the millennia, the Great Pyramid has endured while civilizations rose and fell around it. Its perfect white casing stones were stripped away in medieval times to build mosques in Cairo. Early archaeologists and treasure hunters damaged portions searching for hidden chambers, yet the core structure remains largely intact, a testament to its builders' skill and vision. Modern analysis continues to reveal new secrets. In 2017, physicists using muon detection technology discovered a previously unknown large void above the Grand Gallery, a space roughly the size of the Grand Gallery itself, whose purpose remains unknown. Ground-penetrating radar has identified possible tunnels and chambers, yet to be explored. The Great Pyramid continues to guard its mysteries. What makes the Great Pyramid unique among ancient monuments is not just its size or age, but the questions it continues to raise. How did a pre-industrial society achieve such mathematical precision? How did they move and place stones weighing many tons with accuracy, measuring fractions of an inch? How did they organize a workforce of thousands to create something so perfect when the margin for error was so small? The Rise and Fall of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar's Golden City. The sun rises over the Euphrates River, its first rays catching the blue-glazed bricks of the Ishtar Gate. Beyond, stretching to the horizon, lies a metropolis, unrivaled in the ancient world, a city of towering ziggurats, hanging gardens and bustling marketplaces where dozens of languages mix in the morning air. This is Babylon at its zenith, the golden capital of Nebuchadnezzar, the second's empire. A city so magnificent that its very name would become synonymous with urban splendor and decadence for the next 2,500 years. But how did this ancient wonder come to be? And why, despite its seemingly impregnable walls and vast wealth, did it ultimately fall? The story of Babylon is not just a tale of architectural marvels and military conquest. It's a saga of human ambition, innovation, cultural exchange, and the inevitable cycles of power that have defined civilization since its beginnings. To understand Babylon's golden age, we must first understand its unlikely savior. The year is 605 BCE. For centuries, the mighty Assyrian Empire has dominated Mesopotamia with unprecedented brutality. Their capital at Nineveh was said to be built on foundations of human skulls, their conquests leaving trails of flayed bodies and impaled captives. But now, after a reign of terror spanning generations, Assyria faces a rebellion unlike any before. Leading this rebellion is a man named Nabopolassar, a Chaldean tribal leader from the southern marshlands who has united various peoples against their Assyrian oppressors. After decades of guerrilla warfare and strategic alliances, particularly with the mountain kingdom of Media, Nabopolassar achieves the unthinkable, the complete destruction of Nineveh in 612 B and CE. As Nabopolassar establishes his new kingdom from the ashes of Assyria, his son serves as his military commander. This young prince, whose name would later resonate through history and religious texts alike, is Nebuchadnezzar II. Tall, striking, and militarily brilliant, he leads the final campaign against remaining Assyrian forces at Carchemish in 605 BCE. Victory is decisive, but comes with news from home. Nabopolassar has died. Nebuchadnezzar must race back to Babylon, crossing hundreds of miles of desert with a small escort, leaving his main army behind. He takes a dangerous shortcut through the Arabian desert, rather than following the river routes, gambling everything on reaching the capital before any rivals can claim the throne. His gamble pays off. The prince arrives in Babylon to claim his inheritance. The crown is his, and with it, the opportunity to transform a minor kingdom into the world's greatest empire. Nebuchadnezzar's vision for Babylon is unprecedented in scale and ambition. The city had ancient foundations, originally settled around 4,000 years earlier, and already famous as Hammurabi's capital in the 18th century BCE. But what Nebuchadnezzar imagines will dwarf all that came before. He begins by securing his borders, particularly against the persistent threat of Egypt. At Carchemish, he had defeated an Egyptian army allied with Assyrian remnants. Now he pushes into the Levant, subjugating local kingdoms, including Judah. When Jerusalem rebels in 597 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar besieges the city, eventually deporting its elite to Babylon, the beginning of the Babylonian exile described in biblical texts. A second rebellion prompts him to return in 587 BCE, this time destroying Solomon's temple and deporting even more Judeans. This event becomes a pivotal moment in Jewish history and religious development, while simultaneously providing Babylon with skilled craftsmen, administrators, and intellectuals who would contribute to its cosmopolitan culture. With his western frontier secured, Nebuchadnezzar turns his focus inward. The Babylon he envisions will not merely be a political capital, but a cosmic center, a physical manifestation of divine order on earth. Every brick, every tower, every procession street will reflect Marduk's glory, the patron deity who elevated Babylon to primacy in the Mesopotamian pantheon. The scale of construction defies imagination. The city's double walls stretch for 8 miles, so thick that chariot races are said to take place along their tops. The outer wall alone is 11 meters thick, enough to stop any ancient siegecraft. Between the walls, a moat, fed by the Euphrates, creates an additional defensive barrier. Military engineers from around the world would study these defenses for centuries, marveling at their sophistication. But Nebuchadnezzar builds for more than mere protection. He builds for eternity. At the city's northern entrance rises his masterpiece, the Ishtar Gate, dedicated to the goddess of love and war. Unlike the mud brick structures common throughout Mesopotamia, this monumental entrance gleams with blue-glazed bricks, adorned with golden bulls and dragons in relief. The technical achievement is staggering. Over 15 million bricks, each fired to precise specifications to create the luminous blue surface. Beyond the gate stretches the processional way, a grand boulevard paved with limestone and red breccia stone, imported from distant mountains. On either side, walls adorned with 120 lions, symbols of Ishtar, guide visitors toward the city center. Each year during the New Year festival, statues of the gods would process along this route, affirming cosmic order and Babylon's central role in maintaining it. At the heart of the city stands the Ziggurat Etemenanki, the legendary Tower of Babel itself. This massive stepped pyramid rises in 7 tiers to a height of almost 100 meters. At its summit sits a shrine plated in blue-glazed bricks and gold, dedicated to Marduk. The structure is so massive that it requires its own surrounding complex, with workshops and housing for the priests who maintain it. Nearby stands Nebuchadnezzar's palace, less a building than a city within a city. Its 350 rooms spread across multiple courtyards, housing not just the royal family, but an entire administrative apparatus. The throne room alone spans 52 by 17 meters, its walls covered in glazed bricks depicting lions, bulls, and dragons, symbols of royal power. And then there are the hanging gardens, if they existed at all. Described by Greek historians who never saw Babylon in its prime, these legendary gardens were said to be built by Nebuchadnezzar to please his Median wife, homesick for the mountains of her homeland. Irrigated by sophisticated hydraulic systems that lifted water to multiple terraced levels, the gardens would have been an engineering marvel in the flat Mesopotamian plain. Archaeological evidence for the gardens remains elusive, leading some scholars to suggest they may have been in Nineveh rather than Babylon, or perhaps existed only in romantic imagination. Yet the very fact that such wonders were attributed to Babylon speaks to its reputation for technological innovation and almost supernatural wealth. That wealth flowed from Babylon's position as the nexus of ancient trade routes. The Euphrates and Tigris rivers connected it to the Persian Gulf, and goods from as far as India. Overland routes brought cedar from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, gold from Egypt, tin from as far as Cornwall in Britain, and silk from China. In Babylon's markets, a merchant could acquire virtually any luxury the ancient world produced. This commercial power was matched by cultural and intellectual achievements. Babylonian astronomy was the most sophisticated in the world, with priest astronomers maintaining records spanning centuries. Their observations allowed them to predict celestial events with remarkable accuracy, creating the foundation for mathematical astronomy that would influence Greek, Indian, and eventually Islamic scientific traditions. Babylonian mathematics, using a base 60 system we still echo in our measurements of time and angles, included algebra, quadratic equations, and possibly even rudimentary calculus. Their medical texts combined practical treatments with ritual approaches to healing. Their literature preserved and expanded upon Sumerian epics like Gilgamesh, adding philosophical dimensions to ancient tales. Yet perhaps most significantly, Babylon under Nebuchadnezzar became the world's first truly cosmopolitan city. Its population included displaced peoples from across the Near East: Judeans, Egyptians, Elamites, Phoenicians, Arameans, and others. Rather than forcing complete assimilation, Nebuchadnezzar's administration often incorporated these diverse peoples into imperial governance, creating history's first multicultural administrative system. The biblical Daniel, whether historical or legendary, represents this pattern: a foreign captive rising to high office through demonstration of wisdom and skill. Archaeological evidence confirms that displaced communities often maintain their cultural identities while contributing to the larger imperial project. Akkadian remained the official language, but Aramaic emerged as the common tongue of commerce and everyday life. For over 4 decades, Nebuchadnezzar ruled his empire from this splendid capital. But even the greatest rulers must face mortality. In his final years, the biblical book of Daniel describes a period of madness where the king lived like an animal in his own gardens. Modern scholars have speculated this might represent a stroke, mental illness, or a political crisis sanitized in later accounts. Whatever the truth, Nebuchadnezzar died in 562 BCE, leaving behind an empire at its peak, but lacking the leadership to maintain it. What followed was a rapid succession of short-lived rulers. His son, Amel-Marduk, assassinated after 2 years, his brother-in-law, Neriglissar, who died after 4 years, and finally, Nabonidus, who seized power in 556 BCE. Nabonidus, rather than continuing Nebuchadnezzar's policies, embarked on a strange religious revolution. He elevated the moon god Sin above Marduk, Babylon's traditional patron deity. This theological shift alienated the powerful Marduk priesthood and Babylon's religious conservatives. Even more unusually, Nabonidus spent 10 years in the Arabian oasis of Tema, leaving Babylon under the regency of his son Belshazzar. Why a king would abandon his capital for a decade remains one of history's mysteries. Some scholars suggest religious visions. Others point to trade interests or strategic concerns about Arabian tribes. Whatever his reasons, Nabonidus's absence created a power vacuum that would eventually prove fatal to the empire. As Babylon's internal politics fractured, a new power was rising to the east. Cyrus II, king of the previously insignificant Persians, had begun a meteoric rise, conquering the Medes and forming a new empire that threatened Babylon's borders. Unlike the brutal Assyrians, Cyrus employed a new kind of imperial strategy, presenting himself as a liberator rather than conqueror, respecting local customs and religions while integrating regions into his expanding realm. In 539 BCE, Cyrus marched on Babylon. The expected apocalyptic battle never materialized. According to Persian accounts, later confirmed by archaeological evidence, Babylon's outer defenses fell with minimal resistance. The famous Cyrus Cylinder describes Babylonians welcoming the Persian king with joy, strewing his path with green branches. what happened to Belshazzar, manning the city in his father's absence? The biblical book of Daniel describes the famous writing on the wall, a divine message appearing during a sacrilegious feast, prophesying Babylon's fall. Historical sources confirm the city fell during a night of festivities, though the supernatural elements remain unverifiable. Some classical sources claim Cyrus diverted the Euphrates, allowing his troops to wade under the walls through the riverbed, a brilliant engineering solution to Babylon's seemingly impregnable defenses. Archaeological evidence suggests a less dramatic scenario: internal betrayal by factions opposed to Nabonidus's religious policies. The Persian army may have entered through gates opened from within. Babylon's fall proved remarkably bloodless by ancient standards. Cyrus spared the city, respected its gods. Returning statues Nabonidus had centralized in Babylon to their original temples, and positioned himself as the legitimate successor to Mesopotamian kingship. He even allowed many deported peoples, including the Judeans, to return to their homelands, earning him the unusual distinction of being called God's anointed one in the Hebrew Bible. Babylon remained an important imperial center under Persian rule, and later under Alexander the Great, who died there in 323 BCE. But its independent political power was gone forever. The city declined gradually under Alexander's successors, with population shifting to new centers like Seleucia. By the early Christian era, parts of Babylon lay abandoned, its ziggurats crumbling, its glazed bricks looted for new constructions. Yet Babylon never truly vanished. In Jewish tradition, it became a complex symbol, both oppressor and the place where much of the Hebrew Bible took its final form. In Christian apocalyptic literature, it transformed into an archetypal symbol of decadence and worldly power. In Islamic tradition, it appears as the realm of Harut and Marut, angels who teach mankind magic. The physical city lay largely forgotten until German archaeologists began systematic excavations in the late 19th century. What they discovered confirmed much of what ancient texts described: the massive walls, the blue-glazed Ishtar Gate, the processional street. The excavated Ishtar Gate was reconstructed in Berlin's Pergamon Museum, where it stands today as one of the most spectacular survivals from the ancient world. In the late 20th century, Saddam Hussein began a controversial reconstruction of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, casting himself as heir to Babylon's imperial legacy. These modern structures, built atop genuine archaeological remains, often damaged the ancient city further. During the 2003 Iraq War, a military base established at the site caused additional destruction through vibrations, chemical contamination, and direct physical damage. Today, Babylon stands at a crossroads, recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but facing immense conservation challenges: climate change, development pressures, and the legacy of conflict threaten what remains of Nebuchadnezzar's vision. What makes Babylon's story so compelling is not just its spectacular rise and fall, but how it represents recurring patterns in human civilization. The city's multicultural character prefigured our own global society. Its astronomical and mathematical achievements laid groundwork for modern science. Its religious diversity and theological debates echo through contemporary faith traditions. Even Babylon's fall offers timeless lessons about imperial overreach, internal division, and the importance of maintaining political legitimacy. Nebuchadnezzar built walls he believed impregnable, yet they fell without a siege, a reminder that no physical defense can withstand internal fracture. The Neo-Babylonian Empire lasted less than a century, a mere blink in historical terms, yet its cultural impact continues to ripple through human consciousness after 2,500 years.